The galaxy had been ruled by fear for nearly 1,000 years, and two great empires had divided the stars between them like wolves sharing a carcass. The Crimson Empire controlled the eastern regions with their massive hive fleets and insectoid warriors called the Kethrani, while the Nova Empire commanded the western territories with their reptilian, Vara soldiers and their ancient plasma weapons that could melt entire cities in seconds. Between these two powers lay a neutral zone, a stretch of empty space that neither empire dared to cross. And in this buffer zone lived dozens of smaller species, who survived only because the great powers found them too insignificant to destroy. The Malorans were one such species, a peaceful civilization of slender blue-skinned beings who had never developed weapons of war and who spent their days farming the fertile lands of their homeworld called Valora 7. Captain Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of the USS Sentinel and stared at the stars through the main viewport, his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw set with determination. He was a tall man with gray eyes and short brown hair, and he had spent 20 years in the United Earth Federation Navy before being chosen to command humanity's first interstellar warship on its maiden voyage beyond the solar system. The Sentinel was not a large vessel by any standard, just a heavy cruiser-class ship with experimental railgun batteries that could fire tungsten slugs at a fraction of light speed, and quantum shields that the scientists back on Earth promised could absorb any energy-based weapon. Daniel hoped they were right because humanity knew almost nothing about what waited for them among the stars. "Captain, I am picking up multiple distress signals from a nearby star system," reported Lieutenant Laura Bennett from her station at the communications console, her voice tight with concern as she listened to the transmissions through her earpiece. "They are coming from a planet called Valora 7, according to our star charts. And the signals are desperate, sir. Someone is begging for help." Daniel turned to face her and asked what kind of distress they were dealing with, and Laura's face went pale as she translated the alien language through the ship's computer systems. "They say they are being attacked by two fleets simultaneously," Lavra explained with horror in her eyes. "Both the Crimson Empire and the Nova Empire have arrived at their world, and both are bombarding their cities from orbit. They say millions have already died, and they are begging anyone who can hear them to send help before their entire species is wiped out." Commander Nathan Cole stepped forward from his position near the tactical display, his dark skin creased with worry lines as he approached the captain. Nathan was Daniel's executive officer and closest friend, a man who had served beside him for over a decade. "Sir, we have no intelligence on either of these empires," Nathan said, and a low voice meant only for Daniel's ears. "We do not know how many ships they have. We do not know how powerful their weapons are. And we do not know if they will be hostile toward humanity. This could be a trap, or it could be a situation far beyond our ability to handle." Daniel nodded slowly because everything Nathan said was true, and the smart thing to do would be to retreat back to Earth and report what they had found so that the Federation could send a proper fleet. But the screams coming through those distress signals were real, and real people were dying while he stood here debating. "Navigation. Set course for Valora 7. Daniel ordered in a voice that left no room for argument. And Lieutenant Kevin Morris at the helm station immediately began inputting the coordinates into the ship's computer. Nathan grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him aside, his expression torn between loyalty and fear. "Daniel, think about what you are doing," he whispered urgently. "We are one ship, one single ship against two empires that have ruled this galaxy for centuries. We could be throwing away humanity's only interstellar vessel and everyone aboard it." Daniel placed his hand on Nathan's shoulder and looked him in the eyes with a steady gaze. "We left Earth to explore the galaxy and make contact with other species," he said quietly, "but we also swore an oath to protect the innocent wherever we found them. Those people on Valora 7 are dying right now, Nathan, and we are the only ones close enough to help them. And if we fail? Nathan asked with a heavy heart. Then at least we will have tried, Daniel replied simply. At least we will have shown the galaxy what humanity stands for. I would rather die trying to save innocent lives than live knowing I ran away while millions were slaughtered. Nathan stared at his captain for a long moment before finally nodding his acceptance. He did not agree with the decision, but he understood it, and he would follow Daniel into whatever hell waited for them at Valora 7. The USS Sentinel engaged its faster-than-light drive and jumped into hyperspace, the stars stretching into lines of light as the ship accelerated beyond anything the human mind could truly comprehend. The journey took only minutes, but to the crew, it felt like hours as they prepared themselves for whatever they would find. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer ran final checks on the weapon systems from his tactical station, making sure the railgun batteries were loaded and ready to fire at a moment's notice. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Amanda Chun monitored the engineering readouts and confirmed that the quantum shields were operating at full capacity. Lieutenant Megan Torres gripped the helm controls tightly and whispered a prayer under her breath, asking for guidance and protection for herself and her crewmates. She was the youngest officer on the bridge at only 26 years old, but she had never once doubted her decision to join this mission. When the Sentinel dropped out of hyperspace above Valora 7, the sight that greeted them was worse than anything they had imagined. The planet below was burning, great clouds of smoke rising from cities that had stood for thousands of years. And in orbit around this dying world floated two massive armadas that made the human ship look like a toy. Daniel counted the enemy vessels with growing dread. 400 ships bearing the crimson markings of the Kethrani High Fleet, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, and 300 warships painted in the gold and black of the Nova Empire, their hulls bristling with plasma cannons that glowed with deadly energy. "My God," Lavra whispered as she stared at the carnage on her display screens. "They are not even fighting each other anymore. They are both just bombarding the planet, taking turns destroying cities like it is some kind of game." Daniel felt cold rage building in his chest as he watched beam after beam of destructive energy rain down on the helpless world below. These empires were not at war with the Malorans. They were simply exterminating them for sport, erasing an entire civilization because they could. "Open a channel to both fleets," Daniel commanded, his voice hard as steel. "It is time to introduce ourselves." Nathan moved to stand beside his captain, ready to support whatever came next. The bridge crew held their breath as Laura established the communication link, and Daniel stepped forward to speak words that would echo through galactic history. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The communication channel crackled to life, and Daniel Harris stood tall on the bridge of the USS Sentinel, facing the view screen with a courage he did not entirely feel. Behind him, his crew worked silently at their stations, each one aware that the next few minutes might be their last. "This is Captain Daniel Harris of the USS Sentinel, representing the United Earth Federation," he announced in a clear and steady voice that carried across the void to every ship in both fleets. "You will cease your bombardment of the civilian population immediately and withdraw from this system." For a long moment there was only silence, and Daniel could feel the tension on the bridge growing thicker with each passing second. Then the view screen split into two images as both empires responded simultaneously. On the left side of the screen appeared a creature that made Daniel's skin crawl. Grand Hive Commander Zethrak of the Crimson Empire was a massive insectoid being with glistening black chitin and compound, eyes that reflected the light of 1,000 stars. His mandibles clicking together as he spoke in a voice that sounded like breaking glass. "Unknown vessel," Zethrak hissed with obvious contempt. "You have entered sovereign Kethrani space without permission. Your primitive craft is not recognized by the Hive, and your species is unknown to us. Withdraw immediately, or you will be harvested for genetic material. On the right side of the screen appeared Warlord Koros of the Nova Empire, a towering reptilian creature covered in golden scales with eyes that burned like molten fire. His fanged mouth twisted into a cruel smile as he regarded the tiny human ship. Soft-skinned creature, Koros growled in a deep rumbling voice. You dare to address your superiors with demands. The Vorath do not negotiate with lesser species, and we certainly do not take orders from insects who have barely learned to crawl among the stars. Leave now, or your atoms will join the debris floating above this worthless world. Daniel felt a flash of anger at being dismissed so casually, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had expected this kind of response, and he had already made his decision about what to do next. Tactical, what are we looking at? He asked Scott Palmer without taking his eyes off the view screen. Scott studied his instruments and reported grimly. 400 Crimson vessels ranging from destroyer class to those massive hive carriers, and 300 Nova warships, including several Dreadnought-class battleships. Their weapons appear to be primarily plasma-based and particle beam technology, sir. And our shields? Daniel asked quietly. The quantum shielding is designed specifically to disperse energy-based weapons. Amanda Chan answered from her engineering station. Theoretically, we should be able to absorb a significant amount of punishment. But there is no way to test that theory except in actual combat. Daniel nodded slowly and made his choice. Helm, take us between the two fleets, he ordered. Position us directly above the largest population center on the planet's surface. Megan Torres turned to stare at her captain with wide eyes. Sir, that would put us directly in the crossfire between 700 enemy warships. I am aware of that, Lieutenant, Daniel replied calmly. Do it now. The USS Sentinel surged forward, its engines burning bright blue as the ship moved into the killing zone between the two armadas. On the view screen, both alien commanders watched in stunned disbelief as this tiny vessel positioned itself, exactly where it would be easiest to destroy. What is this fool doing? Zethrak demanded, his compound eyes tracking the human ship's movement with growing confusion. No species had ever willingly placed themselves in such a vulnerable position, and the Hive commander could not understand what these creatures hoped to accomplish. Koros laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed across the communication channel. They are committing suicide, he declared with amusement. These softskins have lost their minds with fear. Let us grant them the death they so clearly desire. Daniel turned to his tactical officer and spoke in a voice of absolute authority. Scott, target the lead Crimson Hive carrier and the lead Nova Dreadnought. Fire warning shots across their bows, close enough to make them nervous, but do not hit them directly. Scott's hands flew across his console as he calculated the firing solutions. Railguns charged and ready, sir. Firing on your command. Fire, Daniel ordered. The Sentinel's railgun batteries erupted with a sound like thunder, twin slugs of solid tungsten accelerating to nearly 1% of light speed in the span of a heartbeat. The projectiles screamed across the void faster than any sensor could track, passing within meters of both flagship vessels. The shields of both alien ships flared brilliant white as they tried and failed to stop the near miss, and warning alarms blared across every bridge in both fleets. No one had ever seen weapons like this before. Solid projectiles that moved faster than plasma and ignored energy shields entirely. What was that? Zethrak shrieked as his ship rocked from the shockwave. What kind of weapon did they just fire at us? Koros was equally shaken, his golden scales paling to a sickly yellow as his tactical officers reported that the human projectiles had passed through their shield grid like it did not exist. Impossible, he growled. Nothing passes through Vorath shields. Daniel allowed himself a small smile before speaking again. Those were warning shots, he announced calmly. The next ones will not miss. Now I will say this one more time because I want to be perfectly clear. You will cease your attack on this planet and withdraw your fleets from this system, or I will destroy every ship you have." Both alien commanders stared at the view screen in shock, unable to process what was happening. This single small vessel had just threatened two of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, and from the look in the human captain's eyes, he meant every word. Zethrak was the first to recover, his mandibles clicking furiously as rage overtook his confusion. "You dare threaten the Crimson Empire with one ship?" He screamed, "All vessels, destroy that human craft immediately. Show them what happens to those who defy the Hive." Koros reached the same conclusion seconds later. "All Nova warships, concentrate fire on the unknown vessel," he commanded. "We will reduce them to atoms and then we will find their homeworld and burn it to ash." For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Crimson Empire and Nova Empire fired in unison at a common enemy. The space around the USS Sentinel transformed into an inferno of destruction as thousands of plasma bolts, particle beams, and antimatter torpedoes converged on the tiny human ship from every direction. The combined firepower of 700 warships was enough to crack a small moon, and both alien commanders watched with satisfaction as the human vessel disappeared behind a wall of fire. On the bridge of the Sentinel, the world became chaos. Warning lights flashed across every console. The deck shook violently beneath their feet, and the sound of energy weapons impacting the quantum shields created a deafening roar that filled the air. Amanda Chun shouted over the noise. "Shields holding at 72% and stable. The quantum matrix is dispersing their energy weapons exactly as the scientists predicted." Daniel gripped his command chair as another volley struck the ship, but his voice remained calm. "How long can we take this kind of punishment?" "Hours if necessary," Amanda replied with growing confidence. "Their weapons are powerful, but they are all energy-based. Our shields were designed specifically to counter this type of attack." Daniel smiled grimly and turned to face the view screen where both alien commanders were watching in horrified disbelief. Their most powerful weapons had done nothing, and the human ship was still there, undamaged and defiant. "My turn," Daniel said quietly, and the galaxy held its breath. Grand Hive Commander Zithrak had served the Crimson Empire for over 200 cycles, leading the Kethrani fleets to victory in countless battles against every species foolish enough to oppose the Hive. In all that time, no enemy had ever survived a concentrated assault from his armada, and the very concept of failure was foreign to his insectoid mind. Yet there, on his view screen, floated the impossible sight of a tiny, human vessel completely unharmed after absorbing enough firepower to shatter a continent. His compound eyes blinked rapidly as he tried to process what he was seeing, but his brain simply could not accept the reality before him. "Increase fire," he ordered desperately, his mandibles clicking with a sound like breaking bones. "All ships concentrate everything on that vessel. They cannot withstand the full might of the Hive forever." Across the void, Warlord Koros was experiencing a similar crisis of faith. The Vorath had dominated the Western Galaxy for 1,000 years through the overwhelming power of their plasma weapons, and no species had ever developed shields capable of withstanding sustained bombardment from a Nova fleet. "Impossible," Koros whispered as he watched the human ship emerge from the firestorm without a single scorch mark on its hull. "This is impossible. No technology can absorb that much energy." The assault continued for another 30 seconds as both fleets poured everything they had into destroying the single human vessel. Plasma bolts and particle beams and antimatter warheads rained down in an endless torrent of destruction. But the Sentinel simply sat there, absorbing it all like a rock standing against the tide. On the bridge of the human ship, Captain Daniel Harris watched the energy readings on his tactical display and felt a grim satisfaction spreading through his chest. The scientists back on Earth had promised that quantum shielding could handle anything, and they had been absolutely right. "That is enough," Daniel said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos of battle. "Time to show them what we can do. Scott, target the primary weapons arrays on both flagships. I want them disabled, not destroyed. We are going to teach these empires a lesson they will never forget." Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer nodded grimly and began calculating his firing solutions. The railgun batteries hummed with power as they charged to full capacity, ready to deliver the kind of devastation that no alien species had ever witnessed. "Targets locked," Scott reported. "Firing on your command, Captain." "Fire," Daniel ordered. The Sentinel's railguns roared to life, and this time they were not firing warning shots. Twin slugs of tungsten alloy accelerated to relativistic speeds and crossed the distance to their targets in the blink of an eye. The first projectile struck Zethrak's hive carrier with the force of a small nuclear weapon. It punched through the forward shields like they were made of paper, tore through 6 decks of hardened armor plating, and exited through the engine section in a spray of debris and bodies. The massive ship lurched sideways as secondary explosions rippled through its hull, and emergency klaxons began screaming throughout every corridor. The second projectile hit Koros's dreadnought with equal devastation. It entered through the bow and traveled the entire length of the ship before exploding out the stern, severing the command section from the rest of the vessel and leaving the flagship drifting helplessly in space. Both alien commanders found themselves floating in darkness as emergency lighting flickered on around them. Their mighty warships had been crippled in an instant by weapons they could neither detect nor defend against. "Status report," Zethrak demanded as his crew scrambled to contain the damage. But the reports that came back were catastrophic. Main engines destroyed, primary weapons offline, hull breaches on 12 decks, and casualty estimates in the thousands. Koros received similar news from his surviving officers. The dreadnought was dying, its reactor containment failing and its life support systems barely functioning. They had perhaps an hour before the ship became a tomb for everyone still aboard. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos on both vessels as he broadcast on all frequencies. "Your flagships have been disabled," he announced calmly. "Your crews are dying as we speak. You now have a choice to make." Every ship in both fleets heard his words and trembled. "You can continue this engagement and watch as I systematically destroy every vessel in your combined armadas," Daniel continued. "Or you can withdraw from this system immediately and allow the Maloran people to live in peace. You have 60 seconds to make your decision." Silence fell across the battlefield as 700 alien warships waited for orders from commanders who no longer had the ability to give them. The chain of command in both fleets had been shattered along with their flagships, and no one knew what to do. Sub-Commander Vethra of the Crimson Fleet was the first to break. She had watched the human weapons tear through her commander's ship like it was made of soft tissue, and she had no desire to see the same thing happen to her own vessel. "All Crimson ships, fall back to Rally Point 7. She ordered over the fleet channel. "We are withdrawing from this system immediately." The Nova fleet followed seconds later when Captain Thelkor, the highest-ranking officer still aboard a functional ship, gave the same order. "Nova vessels, retreat to the border. We cannot win this fight." Daniel watched with quiet satisfaction as 700 warships turned and fled, their engines burning bright as they raced to escape the system. Within minutes, the orbit above Valora 7 was empty except for the USS Sentinel and the 2 crippled flagships. "Sir, should we pursue?" Scott asked, his finger hovering over the weapons controls. "No," Daniel replied firmly. "We came here to stop the bombardment and save the Maloran people, not to start a war. Let them go." Nathan Cole moved to stand beside his captain, his dark face showing a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You did it," he said softly. You actually did it. One ship against two empires, and you made them run. Daniel shook his head slowly. We did it together, he corrected. Every person on this ship played their part. I just gave the orders. Lavra Bennett interrupted with an urgent report. Captain, I am receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. The Maloran government is requesting contact. They want to thank us for saving their world. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Tell them we will send shuttles down as soon as we confirm the area is secure. We have medical supplies and food that might help their survivors. The crew of the USS Sentinel spent the next several hours coordinating rescue efforts with the Maloran authorities, sending teams to help dig survivors from the rubble of bombed cities and providing medical care to the wounded. It was hard and heartbreaking work, but every life they saved made the risk they had taken worthwhile. As Daniel stood on the bridge watching his crew work, he had no idea that news of what had happened above Valora 7 was already spreading across the galaxy. Within days, every civilization in known space would learn about the single human warship that had faced down two empires and won. The balance of power that had existed for 1,000 years was about to change forever, and humanity was at the center of that change. Word of what had happened above Valora 7 spread through the galaxy faster than any ship could travel, carried by traders and refugees and spies who could scarcely believe what they were reporting. The great powers had been humiliated, their combined might proven worthless against a single vessel crewed by an unknown species. In the heart of Crimson Space, deep within the sacred chambers of the Home Hive, the Supreme Hive Queen received Grand Hive Commander Zethrak's report with growing horror. She was an ancient creature, older than most civilizations, and in all her countless years she had never known fear until this moment. Show me the sensor recordings again, she commanded, her massive form shifting on the throne that had supported her weight for 500 cycles. The holographic display flickered to life, and once again, she watched the impossible unfold. There was the human ship absorbing the combined firepower of 700 vessels without taking any visible damage. There were the railgun projectiles that moved faster than any weapon the Kithrani had ever developed. And there was her flagship being torn apart like wet paper. Their weapons completely bypassed our shields, Zethrak explained from his position of shame at the base of her throne, his body still bearing the wounds from his ship's destruction. They fire solid projectiles at speeds we cannot track or intercept. Our plasma screens are designed to stop energy weapons, not physical matter moving at relativistic velocities. And their shields? The Queen asked, her compound eyes narrowing with concern. They absorbed everything we threw at them, Majesty. Particle beams, plasma bolts, antimatter warheads. Nothing penetrated their defenses. It was as if our weapons simply ceased to exist when they struck their hull. The Queen sat in silence for a long moment, processing this information with the cold logic of an ancient predator. The Kithrani had conquered half the galaxy through superior numbers and overwhelming firepower, but neither of those advantages meant anything against an enemy they could not hurt. One ship, she whispered, her mandibles clicking softly. One ship did all of this. Yes, Majesty, Zethrak confirmed miserably, and their captain implied that there were more. He spoke of something called the United Earth Federation, which suggests an organized government with the resources to build additional vessels. Fear crept into the Queen's ancient heart as she considered the implications. If this was what a single human ship could accomplish, what would happen when they built a proper fleet? What would happen when dozens or hundreds of these vessels appeared in Crimson Space? Meanwhile, in the Nova Empire, the Varith Council of War convened in emergency session within the great fortress that had served as their seat of power for 1,000 years. High Warlord Theron sat upon the Dragon Throne, supreme commander of all Nova forces, and listened to Warlord Koros's testimony with barely contained fury. You allowed a single vessel to defeat our entire fleet? Darren demanded, his scaled hands gripping the arms of his throne hard enough to crack the ancient wood. Koros bowed his head in shame. High Warlord, we did not allow anything. We threw everything we had at them and accomplished nothing. Their shields absorbed our most powerful weapons like they were toys. And what of our shields? Darren asked, though he already knew the answer. Useless, Koros admitted. Their weapons fire solid projectiles that pass through our plasma screens as if they do not exist. We have no defense against them, High Warlord. None at all. Intelligence Director Shalvok stepped forward with a data tablet clutched in his clawed hands. We have traced the human ship's hyperspace signature to a star system on the far rim, he reported nervously. A single planet, third from their star, with a population of approximately 8 billion. Theron leaned forward with sudden interest. 8 billion warriors? Unknown, High Warlord. We have almost no data on their species. They appear to be soft-skinned bipeds with no natural weapons or armor. Individually, they would be no match for a Vareth soldier, but their technology is clearly far beyond anything we have encountered. One of the council members, an old general named Drekter, spoke up from his seat at the great table. Perhaps we should strike first, he suggested. Send our entire fleet to their homeworld before they can build more ships. Exterminate them before they become a true threat. Darren considered this for a moment before shaking his head. And what if they already have more ships? He asked, what if this vessel was merely a scout, and their homeworld is defended by hundreds more? We would be sending our fleet to certain destruction. Then what do we do? Drekter demanded. We cannot simply allow this insult to go unanswered. The Vareth have never retreated from a fight, and if word spreads that we fled from a single ship, our subject species will lose their fear of us. Word has already spread, Shalvok replied grimly. Every civilization in the neutral zone knows what happened above Valora 7. The Crimson Empire has already begun recalling their fleets to defensive positions, and several of our own border worlds have reported unrest among the local populations. Theron closed his eyes and made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days before. We will send a diplomatic mission to the human homeworld, he announced. We will offer them peace and trade agreements. We will make them our allies rather than our enemies. The council erupted in shocked protests, but Theron silenced them with a wave of his hand. I do not like this any more than you do, he admitted. But the alternative is a war we cannot win. Better to bend our pride than break our empire. In the neutral zones between the two great powers, smaller species who had lived in terror for centuries began to whisper of hope. The Malorans told everyone who would listen about the human ship that had saved them, about the captain who had risked his life to protect strangers he had never met. The Fenari, a species of avian traders who traveled between both empires, carried the story to 100 worlds. They call themselves humans. They reported to anyone who would listen. They come from a planet called Earth on the far rim, and they have weapons that cannot be stopped. The Gelvathi, a species of aquatic beings who had been paying tribute to the Nova Empire for 300 years, heard the news and began to wonder if perhaps their days of servitude were coming to an end. If humans could defeat the Vareth, perhaps they could protect others as well. Hope spread through the galaxy like wildfire, and with it came questions that no one could yet answer. Who were these humans, and what did they want? Were they conquerors like the empires, or something new, something different? Captain Daniel Harris knew nothing of the storms his actions had set in motion. He was simply doing his job, following the principles that humanity had agreed upon when they first reached for the stars. Protect the innocent, stand against tyranny, and never back down from a bully no matter how big they might be. But the galaxy was watching now, and humanity's next move would determine the fate of countless civilizations. The USS Sentinel remained in orbit above Valora 7 for 3 weeks, and during that time, the crew worked tirelessly to help the Maloran people recover from the devastation that had been inflicted upon their world. Medical teams beamed down to the surface with supplies and equipment, treating the wounded and helping to organize refugee camps for the millions who had lost their homes. Captain Daniel Harris walked through one of these camps on the 15th day, surrounded by blue-skinned Malorans who looked at him with something approaching worship in their large, dark eyes. Children ran up to touch his uniform as if he were some kind of hero from legend, and their parents bowed low whenever he passed. A Maloran elder named Velthus approached Daniel with tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "You saved us," he said in a voice thick with emotion. "When both empires came to destroy us, when all hope was lost, you appeared from nowhere and drove them away. How can we ever repay such a debt?" Daniel felt uncomfortable with the praise and shifted awkwardly. "You do not owe us anything," he replied. "We did what anyone would do in our position. We could not stand by and watch innocent people die." Velthus shook his head slowly. "No one has ever helped us before," he said sadly. "For 1,000 years we have lived in fear, knowing that one day the great powers would decide we had no right to exist. We sent distress signals every time they threatened us, but no one ever came. You are the first, Captain Harris, the first to answer our call." These words stayed with Daniel as he returned to the Sentinel, weighing on his mind as he tried to understand what kind of galaxy humanity had stumbled into. A place where the strong preyed on the weak without consequence, where entire civilizations could be wiped out simply because they were not powerful enough to defend themselves. On the 20th day, Lieutenant Laura Bennett reported something unexpected. "Captain, I am detecting multiple vessels approaching the system," she announced with surprise in her voice. "They do not match the signatures of either empire. These are diplomatic ships, sir, and they are requesting permission to approach." Daniel frowned at this news. "How many vessels?" "Two separate groups," Laura replied after checking her instruments. "One appears to be from the Crimson Empire, the other from the Nova Empire. They are both broadcasting on frequencies associated with diplomatic missions rather than military operations." Nathan Cole moved to stand beside Daniel, his expression wary. "This could be a trap," he warned. "They might be trying to get close enough to study our defenses. Or they might be genuinely interested in talking," Daniel replied thoughtfully. "After what happened, they know they cannot beat us in a straight fight. Diplomacy might be their only option." He made his decision quickly. "Grant them permission to approach, but keep our weapons ready just in case. I want to hear what they have to say." The diplomatic vessels arrived within the hour, and Daniel was surprised by the tone of the messages they carried. The Supreme Hive Queen herself had sent a representative bearing gifts and speaking of friendship between species, expressing her deep respect for human courage and her sincere hope for peaceful relations. The Nova Empire followed with similar offerings. High Warlord Theron proposed a non-aggression treaty, trade agreements, and even offered to share navigational charts of Varath space, something they had never offered to any species before. Daniel listened to both proposals with a poker face that gave nothing away, but inside he was struggling to process what was happening. These two empires had been terrorizing the galaxy for 1,000 years, and now they were practically begging for humanity's friendship. "What do you want in return?" he asked the Crimson Ambassador directly. The insectoid diplomat clicked his mandibles nervously. "Only peace, Captain Harris. The Queen wishes only to establish friendly relations with your Federation and to avoid any future misunderstandings." "And the Vorath?" Daniel asked, turning to the Nova representative. "High Warlord Theron seeks the same," the reptilian ambassador replied smoothly. "Trade and peace and mutual respect between our peoples. Nothing more." Daniel leaned back in his chair and considered his response carefully. These empires were not offering friendship out of kindness. They were doing it out of fear. And that fear might be the only thing keeping them from continuing their campaign of conquest and destruction. "I will accept your offers on one condition," Daniel announced finally. "The Maloran people will be left in peace. No more attacks, no more threats, no more tribute demands. If either of your empires threatens them again, you will have to deal with me." Both ambassadors agreed immediately, falling over themselves to assure him that Valora 7 would be protected from any future aggression. When the diplomatic vessels departed and the Sentinel finally set course for Earth, Daniel found himself staring out the viewport at the stars with a heavy heart. He had not asked for any of this, had not wanted to become some kind of galactic enforcer, but the universe had thrust that role upon him whether he liked it or not. Nathan joined him at the viewport. "You know, this is just the beginning," he said quietly. "Word of what we did will spread to every corner of the galaxy. Other species will start looking to us for protection, and the empires will be watching everything we do." "I know," Daniel replied wearily, "and I do not know if we are ready for that kind of responsibility." "Ready or not, it is ours now," Nathan said. "We showed the galaxy what humanity stands for today. We cannot take that back." When the Sentinel finally returned to Earth, Daniel was summoned before the United Federation Council to explain his actions. Politicians demanded to know why he had risked humanity's only interstellar warship against two galactic superpowers, while military leaders questioned his tactical decisions and called him either a hero or a reckless fool depending on who was speaking. Daniel listened to all of it before standing to address the assembly. "We went out there to discover what kind of galaxy we lived in," he said calmly. "We found it was a place where the strong preyed on the weak without consequence, where innocent civilizations could be exterminated for sport. I showed them there would be consequences now." The chamber fell silent as his words sank in. "Humanity did not ask for this responsibility," Daniel continued, "but we have it nonetheless. The galaxy is watching us, looking to see what we will do next. We can turn away and pretend none of this is our concern, or we can stand for something greater." The Federation Council voted unanimously to begin construction of a proper fleet. Not for conquest, not for empire, but to ensure that what had happened to the Malorans would never happen again to anyone else. In the cycles that followed, the Crimson and Nova empires slowly began to change. Knowing that humanity was watching, that those impossible ships might arrive at any moment, they tempered their aggression and treated the smaller species with something approaching respect. It was not kindness that motivated them, but fear, and that fear kept the peace. And at the center of this new order stood humanity, young and small, and absolutely terrifying to those who had once thought themselves the masters of creation. The galaxy had learned an important lesson that day above Valora 7. Humans did not conquer. Humans did not enslave. But if you threatened the innocent in their presence, if you committed atrocities while they watched, they would stop you. One ship had been enough to teach that lesson, and the Empire shuddered to imagine what would happen when more arrived.